My Hero Academia is no stranger to absolutely insane tinfoil hat theories. Whether it be that Midoriya was actually born with decay and it was given to Shigaraki, or Bakugo travels back in time to become the second user of One For All, or even more insane, Dabi is Toya Todoroki. There is one particular theory, however, that has had the community in its grip for a couple of years now, as one side loves to speculate on it and the other dreads its potential. There also aren't that many theories left as we barrel towards the endgame of My Hero Academia, so people can't help but feel stuck to lament on Dad for One.
Dad for One will be real, and you will love it, because that's what you f***ing deserve.
What exactly is Dad for One? The absolute basis of it is that All For One is actually Midoriya Izuku's father. Upon hearing this, it probably makes absolutely no sense. We've heard about his father before. He's a salaryman with a fire-breathing quirk who is for some reason not at all present in Midoriya's life. There are more or less no comprehensive Dad for One videos, and most of it is just sort of scattered information, so I thought I would gather it all right here, right now, to finally put this theory to rest, so we can try and enjoy the final arc without biting our nails waiting for a DFO reveal every single chapter. Before we get into anything, I want to talk about the specifics of the theory. Obviously, it means that All For One is Midoriya Izuku's father, but what does it entail beyond that? For starters, what would AFO be trying to achieve by having a child? There are two sort of subsects of the theory here. The first being that it was all a grand plan to eventually get back at All Might, or One For All in general, by having his son inherit the quirk, as AFO is known to do these kinds of big brain schemes. And the second is that there is a potential of Nana Shimura and Inko Midoriya to be related, as they both have float-related quirks, and All Might even in-universe says that they both look similar, and AFO knocked up a family member of Nana's to simply sow the seeds of chaos. Okay, but there has to be more reason beyond that, right? Just doing it to troll seems too one-dimensional, and that is where another belief comes in. We see all throughout the story, Vigilantes included, All For One trying to create the next him through scientific means. He made 6, 9, and Shigaraki by transferring copies of his quirk as well as a body built to endure the effects of having multiple quirks, and being strong even without them. So wouldn't it make sense that before all of the scientific experimentation, All For One simply tries passing down the quirk through genetics, which is something that the story places heavy emphasis on through the Todoroki family plotline. So basically, All For One wanted to create a newer version of himself without resorting to such expensive and gratuitous scientific methods, and found that while doing that, he could stick it to the One For All wielders. Seems pretty straightforward. There are even some points in favor of Dad for One within the narrative, and even some meta stuff related to comments by Horikoshi. For starters, it is abundantly clear that the Dr. Midoriya had as a child is the exact same person that supported All For One in the League of Villains. Could this mean that Dr. Garaki was put on duty of watching over Midoriya by All For One? It's possible. As Midoriya grows up, he also ends up wildly obsessed with people's quirks, and it seems that is due to the lack of having one and wanting to be a hero, but what if it is some personality trait passed down by All For One? It's possible. Not only does it fit AFO's goal and love of tormenting One For All users, but let's also think about Midoriya and Shigaraki's ages. Shigaraki is 5 years older than Midoriya, and by all intents and purposes, had outgrown the potential of having a quirk. But during one particularly hot summer at the age of 5, Tenko obtained a quirk. Midoriya's birthday is in July, or what would be summer. Could it be that All For One saw that his newest creation would be quirkless, or basically a good-for-nothing, something fitting Midoriya's already established character, so he pivoted back to Tomura and the scientific method? It's very possible. All For One has also spent the entire series with most of his head being a mystery to us. We see parts of his face, but perhaps it's obscured for a reason. And his hair even looks like Midoriya's, right? Well, no, not really, but still, the rest is still pretty valid. And all of this potential evidence doesn't even take into account the comments by Horikoshi himself, like how he specifically stated that Midoriya's dad will be revealed someday. Now, reveal is a pretty particular word to be used when discussing the protagonist's father. I wonder why it would have to be revealed, and why it hasn't come up as we barrel towards the ending of the manga. Finally, let's take a look at Horikoshi's biggest inspiration, Star Wars. What is one of Star Wars' biggest moments? Not even just Star Wars, but even in film history.
I am your father.
Star Wars references are littered throughout My Hero Academia, like Dagobah Beach, Musatafu Japan, Tatooine Station, Gran Torino being a reference to Yoda, and AFO's link to Vader through his mask. It's very possible that Horikoshi would like to create his own I am your father moment. I have just thrown a lot of potential evidence at you for Dad for One. There is one primary issue with most of this evidence, however. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs. If you are already looking at My Hero Academia through a Dad for One lens, then of course, pieces fit together. Let's take our first example. Dr. Garaki. Could he be placed by AFO to watch Midoriya, or is it just that the narrative has demonstrated that Dr. Garaki is quite literally an esteemed doctor who has a wide reach in the medical field, as well as having places for childcare like the orphanages we see young Toya and possibly Chisaki in? Of course, he might be seeing kids in relation to medical issues. Tenko could have been the backup plan after Midoriya was diagnosed as quirkless, but Midoriya wasn't diagnosed as quirkless until he was 4 years old, leaving a 4-year gap in that theory. Unless AFO took him to his super secret doctor's meeting to only confirm it for himself, but if we go off that logic, then anything might as well be possible. Before we dive any further into this, I'm going to separate the next part into 2 sections: Thematic Consequences, so we can talk about how exactly it impacts the messages of the story, and Narrative Flaws, where we can dive into the narrative inconsistencies with this theory, so we can accurately diagnose and discuss the immense problems that DFO introduces into the story. Okay, it's very easy to say that DFO has thematic consequences, but what are they? Can we even define what the themes of My Hero Academia are? To determine that, we should determine what even are themes. Themes are defined by most people as the central, dominant, or unifying ideas in a text, or a standpoint on the subject, implicit or explicit, which is reflected in the recurrent motifs, imagery, and/or symbols. So, what ideas are being presented by My Hero Academia? This is something that, due to the nature of interpretive analysis, everyone might have a different answer for. However, I do believe that there are some commonalities that most, if not everyone, could agree upon, such as the idea that while not everyone can be a pro-hero, everybody, no matter how powerless, has heroism inside of them. Something pretty explicitly shown to us when we watch effectively a nobody run in to save a boy's life. Somebody with no power, no support gear, and nothing extraordinary about him besides the heroism within, and further built upon by other characters who move before their body can think. We see other things such as the pressure of expectation with people like Hawks, Bakugo, and of course the Todoroki family, or the perpetual cycle of villainy or poverty, and how not everyone is born bad, a statement on nature versus nurture. You could probably create a lot more themes, but one could argue that these are the core themes of MHA, and greatly inform the events and characters within. So let's introduce the question: what does Dad for One add to the messaging of the story? Does it add to the idea of how any random person on the street can act as a hero? No, not necessarily, as it turns Midoriya into a chosen one type character, basically destined to take up One for All and end up being the greatest hero. He's no longer some random powerless kid, but someone put on a path in a grand scheme, something the narrative has been trying quite hard to avoid by making explanations as to why Midoriya unlocked the quirks, and how it could have been anyone as long as they inherited the quirk at that time, or how Midoriya isn't unique in himself in that he's the last holder of One for All specifically, but more so because One for All is getting too big for its own britches. Does it add to the story's messaging on how expectation or familiar pressure can crush someone? No, not really, as Midoriya has felt this pressure from other sources, and never once in terms of family, and I struggle to see why Midoriya would even care. Would it feed into the messaging that not everyone is born bad? Well, yes actually, but is it necessary? We have characters like Shigaraki whose origins reveal him to be an innocent boy thrust into an abusive household and toxic environment, groomed into evil, or Twice, who was an ordinary person but shoved into poverty with a quirk that ate away at him, or Toga, who was a kid who was emotionally abused by her parents due to her taboo quirk, or Gento, who had heroic aspirations but felt like his back was against the wall, or La Brava, who was one misstep away from taking her own life but found inspiration with someone else, or Shinso, who was someone portrayed in a villainous way through his design and his quirk, but is clearly not a bad person. Is Midoriya also embodying this theme really necessary? In a grand story where you portray cycles of poverty, abuse, familial expectations, and so much more, one way you can make this tale feel far less epic is to make it feel contained, or predetermined and almost like it was destiny. This is exactly what spamming familial connections out the ass achieves. Rather than all these random people coming together or butting heads ideologically, you instead have fated battles between family members. One or two here or there isn't anything too bad, but when you start making the assumption that Getten is related to Rei, or Nana and Inko are related, or Muscular and Bakugo are related, or that All for One and Midoriya Izuku are related, all you are achieving is decreasing the scope of the world drastically and making it feel less and less like a living, breathing, organic world. The strongest argument left for them being related is that they look alike, and no, not really. All for One's face is kind of obscured, sure, but what if it wasn't for a relation reason? What if it just makes him look like a terrifying villain, like how Shigaraki's design includes his face being covered until he becomes a much more humanized character? Their hair isn't similar. Midoriya's face is closer to Ochako's than it is AFO's, and they have different eye and hair colors. Characters looking alike is oftentimes used in a thematic sense more than just a literal sense as well, like the resemblance between Shigaraki and Yoichi, or the motherly themes of Nana Shimura and Inko Midoriya, or the direct narrative parallels with Endeavor and Bakugo with the second user. Dad for One contributes pretty much nothing to the thematics of the series that isn't already extremely present, and in fact only takes away from the grand scale of My Hero Academia's remarks on society, narrowing the focus and scope of the narrative to instead focus on fated rivals since they all share blood. But that's enough of the thematic consequences. Let's talk about... So we discussed things in a thematic or messaging sense. How about how it all adds up narratively? If things like the thematics of the series are fairly subjective, then how about what the story quite explicitly tells us? Or do the story facts back up the potential of Dad for One? There are 4 main points that I would like to address when it comes to these story beats. Number 1, Horikoshi's naming conventions. Number 2, Midoriya's character. Number 3, All for One's character. And number 4, Horikoshi's love of Star Wars. The first point is often brought up because Horikoshi has a very specific naming convention, and the Japanese characters for each person's name comes a reference to their character and sometimes their quirk. For Midoriya, for example, a character in his name means 9, referencing him being the 9th holder of One for All, or Shoto being both burning and freezing, so there is definitely a correlation between a quirk user's name and their power. However, Hisashi Midoriya has absolutely nothing in his name referencing his supposed fire-breathing quirk. That is a bit suspicious, isn't it? I would agree if Hisashi was the only character to have a name not matching his quirk, but this is once again a form of confirmation bias. My Hero Academia doesn't only use names to describe their powers, it also uses names to talk about their role in the plot or just reference references to their character in general. Toya Todoroki has no references to fire outside of his last name. His first name has no reference to his quirk at all. Or we have someone like Hawks, or Keigo Takemi, who just has a reference to his hero name and his role in the story. Or finally, Ochako Uraraka, who also has no reference to her quirk in her name, and instead has characters talking about her personality. So what does Hisashi's name tell us? His name is quite literally a play on the phrase Hisashiburi, a phrase meaning it's been a long time, or something you say to someone after not seeing them for a while. It is a reference to his absence in the family and story. If we jump to point 2, Midoriya's character, let's think about him through the lens of Dad for One. Well, it doesn't really do anything for him now, does it? The very loose correlation is that All For One and Midoriya both obsess over quirks, as if it were a personality trait passed down by AFO. Obviously, this is a very tenuous argument to say the least, but there is some truth that there are parental links to behavior in My Hero Academia. Take for example, Bakugo and his mom are quite similar in how they act, or how Toya and Endeavor both love to abuse children. But at the same time, we have just as many, if not more, examples of the opposite being true. In the same family, Bakugo's dad and Bakugo himself are almost nothing alike, and all of the Todoroki kids minus one do not encourage beating children, in fact, thinking everything Endeavor did was quite disgusting. So our only connection here with AFO is a very tenuous one at best, but there has to be something, right? So let's think, if this was revealed, how would Midoriya feel? How would he feel about being the descendant of his greatest enemy? Let's think about all the times he has had to think back about the people he has loved. Who is the one person who never pops up? Not only has the father of the Midoriya household never been mentioned since the start of the story, the only time we see Deku think about him at all is when he was trying to use his quirk, not on death's door, not when he was thinking about his closest relationships, nothing. If Deku, as it stands now, never has any thoughts about his father, why would he care if AFO reveals that he is his father? Besides the obvious shock of, oh shit, this guy's my dad, anything beyond that would feel like a massive, unearned contrivance, as the story has never made us think that Deku should care about who his dad is. Midoriya, the kid who told 2 separate Todoroki kids that they are not their father. This isn't just a negative for Midoriya himself, but if we jump over to All For One, it kind of makes him look like an idiot, which is something you don't want to achieve when writing a grand mastermind, which is something Horikoshi is already failing to do. Not only does it make AFO even less interesting than he already is by having him premeditate every single event in human history, including his son being taken in by his rival and receiving One For All to one day fight him, this sort of begs the question though. All For One, the guy who cared for his brother so much that he sought out a quirk that would work just for him, why would he just up and abandon a child? His child. For a guy who always manipulates and uses people as tools, would it not make more sense or be more consistent for AFO to use his children rather than abandon them? The theory also presupposes that 2 other theories are true, that Shigaraki was originally quirkless and was given to K by AFO, and AFO chose Inko because she looks like Nana, so she must be related to her. Besides the obvious flaws in the familial relations side that we've already discussed, the first part supports the reasoning that All For One wanted to take a more natural approach to producing the next him, rather than a scientific one with Shigaraki, something that on the surface makes sense, but then, here's the kicker. If AFO would abandon Midoriya for being a quirkless failure, why would he then go back to Tenko, who was also supposedly a quirkless failure? The obvious answer is, well, of course, because he is Nana Shimura's grandchild, but hang on. Some sects of DFO itself presupposes that Inko and Nana are related, so what exactly is the difference here? AFO deciding to skip out on Tenko to produce a child with another one of Nana's offspring, to only then give up on a quirkless child to go back to another quirkless child, makes absolutely no sense. If we stop assuming that All For One had a child with Inko, of all people, for a particular reason, then what? It's just good luck? There is also a potential theory that, what if he were to mix the property of Inko's quirk that lets her grab things from a range and mix it with All For One, so he can take quirks from a range? This is actually a really interesting thought that would pretty much immediately fall through when you think that All For One instantly gave up on this idea after one child. Why wouldn't he make an Endeavor play and keep trying to reproduce? I do think this idea is interesting though, but basically it leaves us with no reason that All For One would pick Inko. Wouldn't it also make sense for AFO to want a quirkless kid to begin with? We learn later on that people with no quirks are able to assimilate to receiving a quirk better, since their cup is empty and won't overflow, making it so you don't have to endure a surgery that makes your body capable of holding more than one quirk. A quirkless kid is actually a prime target for AFO, yet apparently he said no to quirkless Tenko, said no to his quirkless kid, then gave Tenko a quirk, and then eventually gives him AFO. It just makes his decisions seem absolutely nonsensical. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room here. Star Wars. It is no secret that Horikoshi is a huge fan of Star Wars, pretty much filling the world of MHA with references to it that I have spoken about prior. This is in fact something that a lot of media does. Authors are human and love including nods to some of their favorite works. There is a point where a line is drawn, however. References to your favorite media does not intrinsically mean you are copying them story beat by story beat, like how recently Horikoshi has taken a liking to Akira references, or how Black Whip and Sero both serve as references to Spider-Man, but we're still not bar for bar recreating those series narratives. Does All For One have some obvious links to Vader? Yes, the mask is very explicit. Does that mean he will have an I am your father moment? Not inherently. However, My Hero Academia has already gone out of its way to give him this moment, just not verbatim copying Star Wars. He got to reveal to All Might that Shigaraki was related to Nana Shimura, and some of the dialogue is almost very similar to that of Vader's, when he says you know it to be true. It gives a nod to one of Horikoshi's biggest inspirations, while twisting it to be his own and making it entirely unique to his own story. You can't really just copy and paste events from one story and add them into an entirely different story. That just isn't how narratives work. And if Horikoshi wanted to create a story that copies Star Wars point by point, he should have just been writing a Star Wars fanfiction instead of wasting my time with Star Wars in disguise. It adds nothing thematically, damaging the already present themes, adds nothing story-wise besides damaging Midoriya's character and All for One's, all while having very tenuous, circumstantial evidence that can only be propped up by confirmation bias. That for one is the worst theory in My Hero Academia history, because even after all of this, it's not entirely impossible. I don't believe it will happen, but I can't discount the 1% chance that Horikoshi has been leading to this, and god, would that be horrible. I also want to make a disclaimer. We all know that Vocal Pineapple is the biggest proponent of Dad for One, and please, please, please leave him alone, okay? Do not use this video to shit talk him or anything. I like Pineapple. We're mutuals on Twitter. I talk to him in group chats. He's a cool ass dude, okay? Please leave him alone, okay? I just want to make this video because it's fun, okay? That's about it. Sorry, I'm answering these questions with my air conditioner on. Question 1 is my favorite MHA opening. It's gotta be Odd Future, the opening for the first core of Season 3. Really fun. I had a really good time with it. And second question from the same person is about when will the retrospective part 2 be releasing, and it's slated to release October 1st alongside Season 6, so please do look forward to that. If you have any more questions about MHA related stuff or anything, please do make sure to comment down below and I'll try to get to it in another video. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the funny YouTube algorithm. You can also go down below and follow me on Twitter where I post only objectively correct takes at all times, and you can also join my Discord where we talk about My Hero Academia, ReZero, Jujutsu Kaisen, and stuff like that. That's about it. See you next time.